Hello everybody, my name is Ratnos and welcome to a video on Augmentation Evoker. This is 10.1.5 PTR that we'll be looking at today, and I basically want to use this video to talk about how the spec functions, kind of the core of the spec, and also my thoughts on how it's going to fit into both Raid and Mythic Plus. So, of course, you may have already heard, but Augmentation Evoker new spec coming next patch in 10.1.5. And it is a buff-focused spec. It's a spec sort of like a helper, support. It will count as a damage dealer, not as a healer, although it does have some off-healing potential, but not very much. It's not designed to be replacing a healer, though I suspect people may try. We'll see how effective that ends up being. I haven't actually done dungeons or content with this spec, but I want to kind of go through and talk about how all of the abilities of the spec work. So at the core, you've still got your whole Evoker kit, the general Evoker class tree, including such powerful utility options as a Pressing Roar with Overawe for Mythic Plus, Time Spiral, Zephyr, you've got Rescue, you got Hover, you got the Drakthir, racial combo of the knockback and the knock-up. The augmentation side starts a little bit differently. You start off with this ability called Ebb and Might. Ooh, some kind of 10.1.5 event is proccing here. Okay, well, that's going to be some topic for a future video. Probably not a video of mine, but anyways, you start off with Ebb and Might. So Ebb and Might is kind of the core of the spec. Ebb and Might is a 30-second cooldown spell that you cast that increases your nearest ally's primary stat based on your own primary stat and causes your eruption to deal more damage. And then you can increase the length of this effect using abilities Eruption, which is kind of that's your main essence spender. You can also increase it with Breath of Eons, which is a replacement for Deep Breath that you can talent. Or you can increase it with your Empower spells, which there are several Augmentation Empower spells that you can select as well. This affects you to increase your Eruption damage and your 4 nearest allies. It will prefer to imbue damage dealers. So if you're in a raid setting, this is going to target 4 DPS. And crucially, it's going to target the 4 DPS nearest to you when you cast it, which is the initial thing that I'm a little bit worried about this, is that you may, especially if you're not playing a lot of Augmentation Evokers, you may be just placing them near 4 specific people, and you may be doing some kind of like, incandescent sliver style planning of where people are standing so that the right people get affected by Ebb and Might. But this, I think, is going to be a little bit less of an issue than I was originally worried about, because it doesn't seem like it's as big of a delta between which specs are good targets for this and which specs are bad targets for this. Obviously, you'd prefer to be targeting some specs over others with some of these effects. But primary stat tends to scale relatively similarly for most specs. So the main thing is, like, if you have people that are using their cooldowns, it's really good to multiply those with the Ebb and Might primary stat. So in theory, there might be something where you're like standing next to the 1-minute classes when they're using their 1 minutes, and then standing next to the 2-minute classes when they're using their 2 minutes, etc. But that level of min-max is probably not super required. I think the main thing is maybe like having one most important person and then kind of making sure you're standing next to them at certain points in the fight. That's probably pretty easy to do. Now, this ability in a Mythic Plus setting is only going to affect your 2 DPS and 2 other DPS, right? And then a tank and a healer, assuming that you still play a tank and a healer, which I am assuming, but maybe people will try to play Augmentation as the healer instead, or replacing a healer. People are already playing no healer comps, so either way, though, it's going to affect fewer DPS players than it does in Raid, right? It's only affecting those. So to counteract that, they've made a passive called Close as Clutchmates that says Ebb and Might and Breath of Eons are both 40% more effective when not in a raid. So in a dungeon setting, you buff the fewer people, you buff the people by more, which is important because in a key, right, you only have 2 DPS. So a lot less value would be coming from that normally, but it's more powerful effect, 40% more effective, and presumably that's a percentage they can tune up or down to basically make Augmentation. They can buff or nerf it between Raid and M+, using that passive, which I think is a really clever way to handle this. So then Eruption, this is instead of Disintegrate, so you don't have Disintegrate, instead you have Eruption as your main spender. It's a cast, and it just does a little bit of split damage. So it's not really an AoE ability, it's split damage, and it does give you 1 extra second of Ebb and Might as well. Then there's a bunch of kind of general S&C passives and stuff that you can get. utility CDR. The next core ability that you can find here is Upheaval, which is an Empower ability. This one gathers earthen power beneath your enemy's feet and sends them hurtling upwards, dealing volcanic damage, and increasing the duration of your active Ebonite effect by 2 seconds. Empowering expands the area of effect. So this is another Empower spell that you don't need to empower for full value. And in fact, it's most efficient at level 1. But sometimes to hit multiple targets, you may need to empower this. And this isn't split damage. This is actually just full AoE damage as well. And yeah, it just knocks targets up, which is pretty cool. There is right below it a combo as well called Seismic Slam, which I don't think is going to be super huge for raid or anything. Maybe useful in M+, and maybe cool in PvP. It says Landslide, which is that kind of little used evoker thing that roots targets for 30 seconds. You see this on like Spiteful Week, people using this. It causes enemies who are midair to be slammed into the ground, stunning them for 4 seconds. 4 seconds, if you put 2 points in this, that's actually a very long stun. Most stuns in this game are 3 seconds or less these days, but you can get 4 seconds out of Seismic Slam. So let me show you guys what that looks like if you do the combo of Upheaval into the slam. So there's Upheaval and then Landslide, and bang, they're turbo stunned now for ages, right? Stunned for literal years over there. So and then still landslided out of that, I guess. So although presumably in any kind of M+ setting, the landslide route breaks fairly quickly. Okay, so that's a pretty cool thing you can get. You can also get Timelessness. This is a buff that you can put on one target that makes them generate 30% less threat for 34.9 minutes, which is scaling. I think that's scaling with Mastery here. Yeah, Mastery is increasing. Mastery increases the duration of all of your helpful auras. And also, Mastery gives you versatility buff for 2 nearby allies, preferring damage dealers to give them extra verse for, again, time that scales with your helpful auras. So I think 10 seconds base, and then it's being increased by my Mastery. So this is a interesting effect. Again, note that Ebonite is primary stat, Mastery is versatility. These are 2 stats that do scale pretty similarly for most specs. So again, unlike Power Infusion, where haste scales really differently for some specs than others, and especially short bursts of haste, this kind of long, sustained versatility in primary stat should be a little bit better at kind of being fair and not super different depending on who it lands on in a lot of groups. But yeah, this is a cool little effect you can take if you have a Devastation Evoker, a Fury Warrior, or something that you need to generate less threat. Or, you know, you can throw it on your tank and create your own Skittish Week as well. Bring back that old affix. So, you know, fun little option for Augmentation Evokers out there. Then we've got, again, some kind of passives. Here's an interesting one, though. So Breath of Aeons replaces Deep Breath. This is a bronze-themed Deep Breath that exposes temporal wounds on enemies for 11.6 seconds, which again is 10 scaling with Mastery. And temporal wounds accumulate 21% of damage dealt by your allies affected by Ebonite. So all of the allies that are affected by Ebonite store up the value on this. And I believe that this is also scaled up as part of Breath of Aeons being scaled up by closest clutchmates, although I'm not 100% sure on that. So it'll be more powerful in M+, perhaps, at least that part. And then it critically strikes for that amount as arcane damage. So it's an auto crit, which makes it seem like it would scale less well with crit, although we do have some other crit scaling later in the thing, which makes sense. So this also applies Ebonite for 5 seconds. This gives you 5 more seconds of Ebonite, removes all root effects, and you're immune to movement impairing and loss of control effects while flying. So this is a pretty nifty effect. And then just below it, you can either make it reduce enemies' movement speed by 70% and attack speed by 50% for, again, that 10 seconds scaling with Mastery. 50% reduced attack speed is massive tank survivability value and a lot of big fortified pulls. Or you can make it say that when allies deal damage with that temporal wounds, they gain a shield for 100% of the damage they deal. And that absorption of the damage dealt by temporal wounds, which again is not 100% of their damage. That is a fraction of their damage, 21% in my case here. And that means that they'll effectively get 21% leech, but it's leech in the form of making an overshield or a shield on themselves, up to 30% of your maximum health. So large survivability value for either your whole group or especially for your tank, depending on which of these 2 options you take here. Defy Fate. an unbelievably powerful passive here as well. Fatal attacks are diverted into a nearby timeline, preventing the damage and your death in this one. The release of temporal energy restores a bunch of health to you and some health to nearby allies over 9 seconds. Healing starts high and declines over the duration, may only occur once every 6 minutes. This seems bonkers powerful as well. I mean, a great cheat death effect that heals you and your friends when it procs as well. So really, really powerful effect here. Then we have, let's see. This is an interesting passive. While flying during Breath of Ian's, 50% of damage you would take is instead dealt over 10 seconds, so you get a little stagger during it. Potentially you could press your Breath of Ian's as a defensive in some cases. And also this would maybe save, I don't know how many Evokers out there have had this happen to them. I've had this happen to me, where you kind of press deep breath and then you realize you've committed a blunder. And this will mean you're a little bit less likely to die in the middle of your deep breath to whatever stupid magma wave you're flying through in the first boss in Neltheris or whatever. Not saying that happened to me last week, but yeah, cool passive here. Not sure you'll take it, but cool. You can also get Geomancy, which is Azure Strike reducing cooldown of Landslide. Again, you can make Azure Strike target extra enemies still, and then you can also make Azure Strike have a chance to echo. Azure Strike's giving you Essence Burst, which are giving you free eruptions, and reducing the cooldown of Landslide means you can potentially run this Upheaval Seismic Slam combo more often. I kind of think these are probably points you're going to end up saving in a lot of cases to get a lot of the other stuff, but it is an option that's here. Bestow Wernstone is a very interesting effect. This is a 1-minute cooldown cast that conjures a pair of Wernstones, one for your target ally and one for yourself. Only one ally may bear your Wernstone at a time. A Wernstone can be activated by the bearer to transport them to the other Wernstone's location within 100 yards. So you effectively, you and an ally basically become like Monk Transcends for each other, and either one of you can activate to Transcend or Demonic Circle or whatever, instantly teleport to the other. Extremely powerful effect. Imagining this setting, this for a raid setting, putting this on like a tank who has to bring the boss over somewhere weird. You know, there's a lot of fights you could think of where this sort of thing would be super sweet, right? Echo of Neltharion, your tank is getting knocked away with the Calamitous Strike, and they can just instantly teleport back after they break the wall. You can teleport to them and rescue them somewhere. You could do all kinds of massive combos with this, not to mention the possibilities in Mythic Plus as well. Very, very powerful effect, but extremely situational. This is, you know, one of those things where there's a lot of fights where moving around somewhere isn't going to matter too much. But, you know, this effectively also gives priests the ability to have a Demonic Circle teleport, right? Something they can use to cancel a knockback or get from point A to point B quickly. If you imagine having this on a fight like Mythic Razageth, for instance, you are now giving the ability, like, imagine you have 3 priests that need help on that fight, or maybe not priests, 3 paladins. So no extra life grips involved. 3 paladins need help on Mythic Razageth knockback to survive. Everybody's getting knocked back. Oh, what are you gonna do? What are you gonna do? Well, you can like rescue one of them forward, and then somebody else could bestow Wernstone to you, and then I guess you could, yeah. So I guess you could save 2 people with this. So maybe not 3. I was trying to think of a way where you could 2 people could both use Wernstone, but I guess that's probably not going to be super helpful. But still, that's it's a lot of extra power there. It lets you could Wernstone back to them and then rescue somebody else or rescue them or something. Actually, yeah, okay. So you could Wernstone to them, rescue somebody else, and then they could Wernstone to you. Although I guess you wouldn't need to Wernstone to them in the first place. You're just getting knocked back along with them. But still, very cool possibility creating button. Blistering Scales is an interesting effect. So this is a 30-second cooldown that gives a target 15 Dragon Scales that give them 40% of your own armor. Remember that Evokers are mail wearers, so this is going to be giving, in my case, like 3,500 armor to a target, which is something. You know, it's not a huge amount of armor for a lot of tanks. It's actually, that would be pretty nice on Brewmaster in particular, because it's a fairly low armor tank. Most tanks end up having ways to get quite a bit of armor, some more than others. But either way, you give a tank some physical damage reduction. And melee attacks against the target cause one scale to explode. This can only occur once every few seconds. It does a small amount of volcanic damage. It can only be placed on one target at a time, and it casts on your enemy's target if they have one. Nice quality of life that they've placed on this button to make it a little bit... A lot of these things auto-cast on helpful targets, which is cool. You can enhance Blistering Scales with the ability to make it give the target an Absorb Shield, which can be increased based on their missing health. So lower health targets gain a larger shield. So you could turn this into sort of a Panic External. Or you could give it 5 more scales, and Casting Eruption restores a scale, giving them more damage and more duration on the armor buff. Then let's see what else we got here. We've got Draconic Attunements. This is a very interesting one. So this is... I feel like I'm saying that about all these buttons, but they are all very interesting because this is treading new space that WoW hasn't really seen before. So Draconic Attunements is... You can either be attuned to the Black or Bronze Dragonflights. If you're attuned to the Black Dragonflight, your 4 nearest allies and you have 5% increased max HP. If you're attuned to the Bronze Dragonflight, you and your 4 nearest allies have 10% increased movement speed instead. Which you can toggle between them by just casting either the attunements. But the main way that I think this will often get used is through Aspect Favor, which says Obsidian Scales activates Black Attunement and amplifies it to increase maximum health by 20% for a long time as well. This looks like 12 seconds base, scaling with Mastery. Whereas Hover instead activates Bronze Attunement and amplifies it to increase movement speed by 40% for a much shorter duration. Looks like maybe 4 seconds, scaling with Mastery. But still, this turns... So it's 4 nearest allies. So in Mythic Plus, this is affecting your whole group. In Raid, this is affecting kind of your little clump or a few random people, sort of like Zephyr, right? Where it's like, oh, you and your 4 nearest. But you can use... Basically, this turns Obsidian Scales into Rally in Mythic Plus, which is wild. And it turns Hover into Stampeding Roar as well. So very cool. Like here's what Hover looks like when you press this, and this is also speeding up your whole group as well. Like you can see, here's the movement speed about to fade. There's the Bronze Attunement movement speed that's just faded. So I guess it's not super noticeable, but it was definitely something. Definitely a nice little. Some of that was the Hover movement speed boost and some of the other Hover stuff. So I don't want to oversell it too much, but I'll oversell it a little bit. Seems like a very powerful little passive effect. Spatial Paradox is a 2-minute cooldown that grants you and the nearest healer within 60 yards, if you don't have a healer targeted, or otherwise a targeted healer within 60 yards, the ability to cast while moving, and 40 extra yards of range for 10 seconds scaling with your Mastery. Wow, that's powerful. Imagine having something like this on Mythic Rashok during the intermission. You know, you throw this on somebody and then they can just move around and cast during that phase, dodge and heal, do those sorts of things. There's no way to not to have this affect a DPS player. It only targets you and a friendly healer. So even if there's no healer within 60 yards, it's just you. It'll just hit you. You can't target a DPS player with this, even if you tell all healers to like go 100 yards away. So there's no cheese with that, which is good, because otherwise we would potentially try and find ways to do that. Okay, then we've got some passives. Upheaval, which again is your Empower spell. You can make it not interrupted and have extra crit chance. Probably mostly a PvP thing. Or you can make it deal extra damage to the primary target and launch the primary target even higher. Some more Empower spell stuff. Yeah, Essence stuff. There's a little bit of an off-healing branch here. Emerald Blossom increasing target's healing received. And also you can make it no longer have a cooldown, do extra healing, increase the duration of your active Ebb and Might effects by 1 second, but costs 3 Essence. So this is an interesting... This is definitely like the off-healer build. There's not much for it, but there's these 2 talent points that might make it a pretty reliable thing if you instead of getting a little bit of DPS, you want to get a little bit of HPS out of your Augmentation Evoker. You can also have the effects that extend Ebb and Might also extend Symbiotic Bloom, which is target's healing received. So that's probably more of the kind of, if you don't want to change the playstyle to be too much of an off-healer, but you just want an extra buff to be the increased healing received, which this is a 2-point node, so 6% increased healing received. Then you could just take this point instead, and you just press Emerald Blossom once, and you extend it like Ebb and Might on you and your allies as long as you can. Okay, now we're getting to the good stuff at the very bottom of the tree. There's a little bit, another buff you could get for Blistering Scales that makes it do 10% more damage, stacking up to 10 times each time it explodes. Still not going to be doing huge amounts of damage here, right? We're still talking about 6,000 per explosion. But this turns Blistering Scales into maybe a global that's going to end up doing, you know, a couple 100k. I think it doesn't do split damage as well, so maybe a good AoE bit of DPS, but still not like insane damage, and it is spread out, and it needs to go on your tank as well, but you know, it does have defensive value as well, so this might be a good contribution for their M+ DPS. Essence Burst has a chance to not be consumed. Essence Burst reduces the cast time of Eruption. Prescience is our next interesting thing. This is an active that's a 12-second cooldown, giving an ally 3% crit for 20 seconds, scaling with Mastery, affecting the nearest ally within 26 yards, preferring damage dealers if you don't have an ally targeted. If you have an ally targeted, it will overwrite and target them instead. But still, very, very... so this is something you'll take in raid and stuff, and casting Prescience on cooldown is going to be worth quite a bit of damage, right? Because 3% crit for however long this lasts, you know, 20 seconds scaling on an ally, that's probably a good use of a global, and you just slam that every 12 seconds. You kind of rotate it. You know, if you get enough mastery, you could probably keep this... You probably... You know, so if you have a little bit of mastery, right, 24 seconds on this is pretty reasonable, and then you have a 2-person rotation on your presciences. Or if you actually have a lot of mastery, you maybe have it sort of on 3 people, rotating it between 3 people, having it fall off for a little bit on each of them, and giving 3% crit. Then you can enhance that to also give you a chance to get Essence Burst whenever you press it. And you can enhance it to give the ally a chance for their spells and abilities to echo their damage or healing, dealing 15% of the amount again. So this is something that will scale better on some specs than others. Crit scales better on some specs than others. And obviously doing this on people in their cooldowns is going to be super valuable as well. So quite a bit of skill to that play there. Still not quite power infusion vibes of much, much better on some than others. But this adds a lot of skill to the raid, preservation, or augmentation evoker playstyle, I think. Okay, consuming Essence Burst gives you intellect, stacking for a bit, and giving you intellect is really nice because your Ebonmite gives your intellect to other people. Motes of Possibility is Essence abilities have a chance to form a mote of diverted time near you. Anyone who comes into contact with the mote gains 10 seconds of reduced cooldown to their major ability. So the Ebonmite stuff at the top is like, especially if this damage, you know, like you're already probably going to have the demo locks trying to stand near you. But with this, now they're going to be, the demo locks are going to be standing near you, and they're going to be running into those augments, these motes. 10 seconds of reduced cooldown on their major ability. This is, to me, the biggest thing that's going to have different value on some specs than others, because, you know, major ability cooldown reduction is really powerful for some specs, and it's okay or good for some other specs. So generally, this is going to be massive value for people that can min-max it, but of course, you have to look and see where these motes are, so that's going to be extra skill, not just on the augmentation evoker, but on their nearby players as well, to identify that these motes are there and pick them up to get their cooldown reduction. Definitely going to be true that the top parsing people of any given spec are going to be collecting Motes of Possibility. I think there's going to be a lot of criticism of Augmentation Evoker from the perspective of like, oh no, Warcraft Logs is bricked now. And even if a lot of this damage that, you know, all the damage that Breath of Eons does gets attributed to the Augmentation Evoker, it's going to be impossible to really separate the, like, primary stat versus crit. Even if you tried to, it would be really hard to separate all of the value that came from that and put it onto the Augmentation Evoker instead of the actual damage dealer. But the Motes of Possibility CDR is, like, effectively impossible to do that with. So it's definitely true that Warcraft Logs, like, the top log people of certain specs are going to be the people that are getting help from Augmentation Evokers for sure. I don't think that's a problem with Augmentation Evoker if it's a fun spec. I never thought that was the problem with Power Infusion. My problem with Power Infusion was like, oh, this is really good on some specs, really bad on some other specs. And the fact that it's really good on some specs means that those specs are now getting nerfed. And if you're playing that spec and you're in a raid that doesn't have PI, that sucks. It sucks to either not be getting PI or to be getting nerfed, whether or not you're getting PI. It sucks to be, you know, playing a spec that doesn't scale haste and seeing other people having the fun with PI and not have it be something you can have fun with. And it was annoying to kind of facilitate, especially this expansion, because the priests want a PI on their own schedule, and then you need to delay it to be on the DPS's schedule. None of those problems, to me, seem super likely to exist with Augmentation Evoker, except for the bricking Warcraft log side of things, which I don't care about that. Like, I love parsing, I love cheesing logs, and doing stupid stuff from time to time, you know, trying to get some, my guild used to do speed kills back in, like, Legion, and that was fun. There's a lot of fun that can be had with those, and to me, Augmentation is just like, yeah, that's the new rule of the road, is if you want like a super giga parse, you know, it's going to involve Augmentation Evokers. Okay, Inferno's Blessing. Fire Breath grants the Inferno's Blessing for 8.5 maybe seconds, scaling with Mastery, something like that, to you and your allies affected by Ebb and Might. Probably 8 seconds scaling with, it's probably 8 seconds scaling Mastery. Doing some mental math here, trying to figure out on all these. Giving their damaging attacks and spells a high chance to deal an additional amount of fire damage. So you're going to be wanting to press Fire Breath on cooldown, as you're already going to be wanting to do because Empower abilities extend your Ebb and Might. And yeah, that's potent. This does increase the value of haste-based targets for your Ebb and Might as well, because presumably they'll be proccing this fire damage more frequently. But still, yeah, I mean, this is definitely an important passive for the damage that you'll be doing as well. Plot the Future. Breath of Ians grants you Fury of the Aspects, which is Bloodlust, for 15 seconds after you land without causing exhaustion. Another very powerful effect. You're already going to be wanting to press Breath of Ians basically on cooldown, but it is a 2-minute cooldown, so it is a long, long cooldown. Our next ability will help reduce that, though. Time Skip is a 3-minute cooldown channeled ability that causes you to surge forward in time. During the 2 seconds you're channeling it, your cooldowns recover 1,000% faster. So 1,000% times 2 seconds. They love putting the 1,000% there because that looks really flashy, but it's only for 2 seconds. So you can effectively think of this as giving you 20 seconds off of your cooldowns during the time you're channeling it. So it's powerful. It affects itself. And you can talent it to channel for 1 second longer, giving you an extra 10 seconds of cooldown reduction there. That can get you back to an extra Obsidian Scales charge, which again can be a group-wide buff. It can give you a lot of good reduction on your short cooldown abilities, but it's not like it lets you go Breath of Ians, Time Skip, Breath of Ians. That's still too long of a cooldown for that to be feasible. But you can instead take Interwoven Threads to just give you a passive 10% cooldown reduction if you don't want this active ability as well. So I'm not sure which of those is going to be better. No idea. Haven't looked at any sims or anything. I assume the people trying to create sims and do the theory craft for this are hard at work, and can't wait to see what they come up with. That is not what this video is about. This video is just about reading through and being excited by all this stuff. And then there's some stuff here with Eruption reducing the cooldown of Upheaval, giving you sort of a similar playstyle to, you know, your Pyre or Disintegrate, reducing the cooldown of Fire Breath on that one. And Breath of Ians causes an eruption at the first 3 enemies struck, which is a very, very cool effect. And you can even combine it a little bit. Here, check this out. You can go Breath of Ians. That's going to cause the eruption. And, you know, you get your Bloodlust, right? And then you're just doing big damn on all the targets. Tip the Scales, of course, works with the Upheaval as well. So, yeah, cool stuff. The Overlord thing, I think, is going to be very good, especially if there are those multiple targets, because giving you those extra 3 enemies or 3 eruptions is extra Ebb and Might extension. So and I think that's going to be the core of the spec, is like Ebb and Might uptime, because by default this is 10 of every 30 seconds. Increase it with Mastery, increase it with Haste effectively as well, giving you extra casts on stuff and cooldown reduction on things. And this also scales with Critical Strike. So Sands of Time is a passive that this is the passive that makes things increase the duration of your active Ebb and Might effects, and this effect can critically strike, which gives you 50% more duration increase. So it's a little bit less of a powerful crit than a DPS crit, which does 100% more damage, I think. But giving an extra 50% extension on your Sands of Time crits is also an important thing to note for how this spec is going to scale. So Haste, Mastery, and Crit all have obvious ways that they increase the sort of buffing potential of the spec, and I'm not sure how their relative values are going to end up stacking up. I can say I suspect versatility is going to be hot garbage for Augmentation Evoker, because you've got so many good defensive options, the damage reduction side of things, and then the fact that it increases your damage and healing done, right? Like, who cares? So I think this spec could use some form of versatility scaling as well into it to make that stat a little bit less just straight up dead. Or I could be misinterpreting something and that could already be built in somewhere and I could have missed it. A couple other passives and stuff to read through, because there's obviously some stuff that's not on the talent tree. Nourishing Sands is a kind of outdoor worldy thing. When you kill an enemy that yields experience or honor, the cooldown of Emerald Blossoms refreshed, and your next one gives you an extra 20% of your health. So that'll be nice for some outdoor world questing stuff. And I think that's it for our abilities here. So, what do we think of Augmentation Evoker? Well, I think the fantasy is cool. I think the abilities are sweet. I think they've designed a lot of bangers, a lot of exciting buttons in here. The talent tree is definitely cool. There's a couple of different builds that sort of jump out. There's a lot of powerful stuff that I think you're going to want to do. Is the gameplay fun? I'm not sure. I think a lot of the gameplay in Raid is going to involve... It's going to feel sort of like being a healer, where you're largely looking at people's raid frames, seeing how long is on Ebb and Might, who's being affected by it, how long is on Prescience. I think a lot of it, you probably will ideally be tracking cooldowns as well, tracking major cooldowns of a few targets as well, and then granting them Prescience before they're pressing their major cooldowns, having an idea of where that's going, and then also using your utility in the form of stuff like your attunements, all of your Evoker utility and stuff to help out as well, kind of being like a job doer in Raid also, because most of your value can still be done while you're doing jobs. And then, of course, you still do need to be like spamming your disintegrates, or spamming your eruptions to give you extra Ebb and Might extension. So doing your rotation and still hitting the target is going to be important. Casting your fire breaths, casting your upheavals will absolutely be important. Lining up your Breath of Ians with your, ideally you probably want to be lined up with 2-minute classes to have your Breath of Ians line up with them, with their cooldowns, because those are all going to be nice and multiply together as well. So yeah, very interesting spec. Curious to see how it plays out. My guess is that they can, with the use of the passive closest clutch mates, they can make it so that this spec is good in M+ and Raid. By moving around that 40% in either direction as they see necessary, right? If augmentation is too good or too bad in one or the other, you can increase or decrease the coefficient here, and that makes that really easy probably to tune. That's definitely something that I hope that they will do frequently if they need to. And then I guess the other thing is, I think this spec is going to be very good. I think the spec is going to be very good because I think that using this well is going to be pretty hard, and using this in a good raid group with targeting the right specs, having people that are predictable, that are going to be pressing their cooldowns at predictable times, and doing their rotation correctly in their cooldowns, that is a very high bar to clear. So if they make augmentation not good outside of those circumstances, right? If they make augmentation in an average group where people are mostly doing their buttons pretty good, but not super predictably, and it's kind of hard to know exactly what's going on, and you're pressing Prescience on like some good targets, but not necessarily the best ones, and your Ebb and Might target is like medium good, your Ebb and Might targets are medium good. If they make augmentation good at that level, it's going to be insane when you're actually maximizing this, right? When you're having Ebb and Might going on the correct 4 people every time, when you're having Prescience perfectly juggled in the optimal way between the targets that are going to be getting the most damage out of it, and those people are actually pressing their buttons to get the most damage out of it, when your Breath of Ians is lining up with Bloodlust in the important phase, on the important targets, with 4 targets that have Ebb and Might and are pressing their cooldowns at the same time. It's hard to imagine that they balance it. I think they're going to want it to be a good spec in the average case, and I think this is going to be a spec with a ceiling that is way higher than its average case. So I think that in like Race to World First settings, potentially super high keys, this is the kind of spec that I think is going to be really, really, really good. So hopefully it is fun to play with, and to play with them in your group, because I think this might be the new best spec in the game, perhaps. It seems like it has that potential. That being said, Maybe I'm just on the hype train, the copium train. I'd love to hear what you think about all of this in the comments down below, whether some of these things are exciting to me. I will say, I think the Ebb and Might part where you have to be near, like, it's 4 nearest allies in raid is a little bit annoying, and also does increase that kind of weird skill ceiling where it's like, it's skill, but it's like organizational skill of having the right 4 people in the right place. So I would kind of prefer if there was an option to just like target 4 people and have them be your Ebb and Might somehow. Have it be something like, you know, maybe like something like Prescient supplying a dot or a thing on somebody that makes Ebb and Might prefer them while it's active the next time you cast it, something like that. Or some way to opt in to a little bit more of a, even if it's a little bit less powerful in theory, a little bit easier to apply Ebb and Might to ideal targets. I think that would be something that would maybe make the spec more fun to play with and as. But either way, I'm excited to see how this works out. I was initially pretty skeptical of Augmentation Evoker and a support playstyle in WoW, but reading through a lot of these abilities makes me think there's just going to be a lot of gameplay to this. And yeah, if anything, the thing I'm maybe most worried about is I think we might be moving into a world of like, you know, those like 14 or 15 raid buff specs that are kind of locked into each raid these days. Kind of feel like maybe you fill up several of the remaining specs with Augmentation Evoker, because this does seem really good. Anyways, let me know what you think. Hope you enjoyed the video. Remember to hit like and subscribe, those 2 wacky buttons. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next one. Bye.